Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, where every silence hides a secret waiting to be uncovered. New moon symbol. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. Globe showing Europe Africa detective ###. Chapter 1, The Disturbance in Bloomsbury. It was upon a bleak February morning, the kind in which the London fog drapes itself over Baker Street like a sodden blanket, that Sherlock Holmes received an unexpected visitor. The grey light of day filtered weakly through the curtains of our sitting room, illuminating the thin smoke spirals that curled from Holmes's pipe as he sat absorbed in the columns of the Times. I, for my part, had been contentedly perusing a medical journal of modest significance when the familiar knock of Inspector Lestrade broke the tranquillity of our quarters. There was a briskness to his step upon entering, though it lacked its usual self-assurance. He removed his hat with a gesture less crisp than was his wont, and I observed at once the furrow of perplexity upon his brow. He greeted us curtly, then sank into the armchair opposite Holmes, his expression betraying both irritation and curiosity. "A queer business, Mr. Holmes," said he, after a moment's pause. "One I thought it prudent to bring before you without delay." Holmes laid down the newspaper, steepling his long fingers beneath his chin. His keen grey eyes, which had appeared listless a moment before, brightened with sudden animation. "You do me an honour, Lestrade," he said. "A case that confounds Scotland Yard within a day of its occurrence is indeed a rarity. Pray, let us hear the particulars." Lestrade cleared his throat. "The matter concerns Lord Everley of Bloomsbury, a man of some repute in society. Last night, a theft occurred at his residence, yet not of the sort one might expect. The culprit made away with nothing more than a mantel clock, an antique of French origin, while leaving untouched silver, jewels, and paintings of far greater value." Holmes's brows lifted a fraction. "A mantel clock, you say? Was it of extraordinary workmanship or pecuniary worth?" "The piece is old enough, certainly," Lestrade replied, "though its value is more sentimental than financial. Lord Everley insists it had ceased to function years ago. A clock that does not tick, and yet it alone has vanished from a house filled with treasures. There were no signs of forced entry, no window latch disturbed, no lock tampered with. It is a most singular affair." Holmes leaned back, a faint smile playing upon his lips. He took 2 deliberate puffs of his pipe before speaking. "A silent clock, stripped of utility yet preserved for sentiment. Tell me, Lestrade, what man of ordinary criminal bent risks detection to secure a trophy so useless? A common thief would sooner empty the silver cabinet. No, the removal of the clock must serve some purpose beyond theft. It is the silence, perhaps, that makes it speak loudest." Lestrade shifted uneasily. "We considered the possibility of a disgruntled servant, but none appear to have absconded. One of the footmen, Carrow by name, was indisposed last evening and dismissed early. Otherwise, the household was intact. The doors were bolted as usual, yet the clock was gone when the drawing-room was inspected this morning." Murmured Holmes, his gaze distant. "The absence of disturbance often reveals more than a ransacked room. An object removed quietly, deliberately, may point less to avarice than to knowledge. Someone knew precisely what they wanted." At this, I ventured a remark. "Surely, Holmes, it may be nothing more than eccentricity. Some thief with an eye for curiosities, or a collector who values French craftsmanship." Holmes turned his penetrating gaze upon me, his expression indulgent yet tinged with impatience. "My dear Watson, men rarely risk imprisonment for mere eccentric whim. A deliberate choice, amid abundant alternatives, must contain design. Imagine silver that would jingle in a pocket, a painting rolled in haste, all passed over. And in their stead, a clock that cannot even mark the hour. Eccentricity, perhaps. Or purpose." The inspector, though visibly unconvinced, produced a small notebook from his coat. "I thought you might say as much." Lord Everley requests discretion. Naturally, he is reluctant to involve too many in what he considers a family matter. Still, he is anxious for the clock's return. "I had hoped, Mr. Holmes, that your peculiar talents might discern what ordinary police methods cannot." Holmes's eyes glistened with that peculiar sharpness I had learned to recognize as the herald of his intellectual engagement. He rose and paced the room, his long strides betraying an eagerness that contrasted with his otherwise languid demeanor. "Lestrade," said he, pausing before the fireplace, "we shall accompany you to Bloomsbury this afternoon. I should very much like to see this drawing-room, the outline where the clock once stood, the very air of the place. A thief leaves more than empty space behind him, he leaves intention, and intention leaves trace." I confess I was somewhat puzzled by the excitement he displayed over what seemed, to my eyes, a trifling domestic theft. Yet, as I had learned in countless instances before, the most trivial detail to my mind often proved the very fulcrum upon which Holmes would pivot his deductions. Lestrade, though still sceptical, appeared relieved. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I shall expect you both at Lord Everley's residence by 3 o'clock. If there is more to this business than meets the eye, I dare say you will uncover it." With that, he replaced his hat and strode from the room, leaving a silence filled only by the faint ticking of the clock upon our mantelpiece. How ordinary its sound seemed, and yet how curiously apt in light of the morning's tale. Holmes, still standing before the hearth, cast me a sidelong glance. "Watson," said he softly, "a clock that does not tick is a curious companion. One must ask, what does it conceal, that it should be taken when all else remains? It is in such questions, my friend, that the chase begins." And so, with the fog thickening beyond our windows and the city's ceaseless rumble stirring beneath, we prepared ourselves to plunge once more into mystery, an affair that would, in the days to follow, prove far stranger than either Lestrade or I could have conceived. Chapter 2: A Visit to Lord Everley. The fog of that dreary February afternoon clung about the hansom cab as it rattled through the streets toward Bloomsbury. Holmes sat opposite me, his chin sunk upon his breast, his eyes half closed as though he dozed. Yet I knew better. Behind that mask of languor, his restless intellect was already weaving hypotheses from the sparse details Lestrade had furnished. From time to time, the faint twitch of his fingers betrayed the silent activity of his mind. We arrived at length before the residence of Lord Everley, a tall Georgian townhouse whose sombre facade loomed against the yellow murk. A butler of grave aspect admitted us and ushered us into a richly furnished drawing-room, where the master of the house awaited. Lord Everley was a man well advanced in years, his once robust frame bowed by age, his features marked by a melancholy dignity. He rose stiffly as we entered, and extended a hand to Holmes with an air of weary courtesy. "I am indebted to you for attending so promptly, Mr. Holmes," said he. "Inspector Lestrade assures me your reputation in such matters is second to none." Holmes inclined his head with characteristic reserve. "Your lordship does me honour. Pray, let us lose no time. I should like to view the scene precisely as it stands." Lord Everley gestured toward the mantelpiece. There, upon the marble shelf, was a vacant space, a faint outline in dust marking where the clock had once rested. The surrounding ornaments, a pair of silver candlesticks and a porcelain figurine, remained undisturbed, their positions betraying no sign of haste. "It was discovered missing this morning," said Lord Everley, lowering himself into a chair. "I confess I am at a loss to comprehend why any thief should trouble himself with an object of such little use. The clock has not ticked these 30 years. It belonged to my late wife's family and I kept it chiefly for sentiment." Holmes stepped lightly across the carpet, crouching before the mantel. With a delicate finger he traced the dust outline, then examined the pile of the carpet where the clock must have been set down before removal. He produced a magnifying lens from his pocket and bent close. "A faint indentation, Watson," he murmured. Note the compressed fibres, scarcely rebounded. The object was set down here briefly before being carried away. And here, observe these infinitesimal shavings. He indicated several specks upon the rug, scarcely visible save to his trained eye. Fresh, fine wood, likely from a tool employed in opening or adjusting the clock. Curious, is it not, that the thief should meddle with its innards before departing? Lestrade, who had hovered nearby with an air of impatience, frowned. What could that matter? He may have damaged it in lifting. Holmes gave a faint smile. The clock was not simply lifted. It was tampered with. We next inspected the windows and doors. Each was securely fastened, with no indication of forced entry. Holmes examined the locks with practiced care, but shook his head. Undisturbed, said he. Our visitor had no need of burglary. Lord Everley looked troubled. That would suggest one of my own household. Holmes turned to him. Might I trouble you for the list of your servants? There are 5 in all, replied his lordship. The butler, Mr. Jessup, has been with me 20 years. The cook and 2 maids likewise are beyond reproach. Only Caro, the footman, is of recent hire, 6 months, perhaps. Last night, he pleaded illness and I permitted him to retire early. Holmes's eyes narrowed a fraction. Did any observe him leave the house? He went by the servants' entrance. Jessup tells me he saw him clutching his head and complaining of pain. Holmes paced slowly about the room, pausing at the writing desk. He examined the blotter, then the drawer, where quills and ink were kept. A small stain of black ink clung to his fingertip. He compared it with the faint violet smudge Lestrade had produced from the crumpled scrap of paper earlier. Different inks, said Holmes softly. And yet, why should a scrap in French lie at a servant's door? Intriguing. Lestrade interjected with some irritation. We may inquire into Caro presently. For now, I should be glad to know whether the clock holds more value than your lordship admits. Antiquarians often inflate their sums. Lord Everley shook his head firmly. I tell you, sir, it is worth little beyond the memory of my dear wife. She cherished it as a relic of her family in Normandy. It ceased to function long ago. His voice faltered as he added, if it is not recovered, the loss will wound me more deeply than you might suppose. Holmes's gaze softened for a fleeting instant. Then, with brisk energy, he resumed his examination, peering beneath cabinets and behind draperies. From beneath a tall bookcase he produced another clue, a sprinkling of the same pale wood shavings. Ah, said he, holding them up. So our thief lingered in this very room, employing some instrument with deliberate care. Not the work of a man snatching an object in haste. The butler, Jessup, entered then to announce tea. Holmes declined, his mind evidently absorbed. He questioned the servants briefly, all professed ignorance. The maids had retired early, the cook heard nothing unusual, and Jessup swore that all doors were bolted at his nightly round. Caro alone, it seemed, had parted from the routine. When at last we took our leave, the twilight had deepened and the fog pressed closer about the lamplight. Lord Everley stood in the doorway, his figure stooped against the glow. Holmes paused upon the step and addressed him gravely. Your lordship, I cannot yet promise the return of your clock. But I assure you, the motives behind its removal shall be brought to light. Whether it was stolen for profit, concealment, or sentiment, the truth will not long remain hidden. Lord Everley bowed his head in silent gratitude. As we climbed once more into our cab, I could not help but remark, Holmes, do you truly suspect the footman? Holmes smiled enigmatically, drawing his cloak about him. Watson, I suspect nothing. I observe. And what I observe tells me that the clock's silence may conceal a voice loud enough to ruin reputations. Let us see where it leads. And with that cryptic utterance, we drove away into the gathering London dusk, the case only just unfolding. Chapter 3: The Silent Neighbour. The fog still clung to London the following morning, though it had lifted somewhat in Bloomsbury, where we arrived in good time to resume our inquiries. Holmes had expressed a particular wish to speak with the neighbouring residence of Lord Everley, for he held, as always, that the eyes of the ordinary observer, untrained, casual, and unassuming, often glimpsed what those too close to the scene overlooked. At the adjoining house we were received by Mrs. Pargeter, a widow of middle years with sharp eyes and a tongue unsoftened by delicacy. She lived alone with a companion and had, by all accounts, a reputation for observing everything that passed in her street. I confess I had braced myself for an interview of trivial chatter, but under Holmes's deft guidance her recollections proved more useful than I had anticipated. "You will forgive my bluntness, gentlemen," she began, once we were seated in her parlour, "but I said as much to Inspector Lestrade last evening. I saw a man carrying a parcel away from Lord Everley's house not long after dusk. I know what I saw, for I was drawing my curtains at the time." Holmes leaned forward slightly, his gaze keen yet courteous. "Pray describe the figure, madam. Was he one of the household staff, to your knowledge?" Mrs. Pargeter pursed her lips. I could not swear to his face. He kept his head down, and the fog was thick. But he carried something wrapped in cloth, rectangular and not so large, about the size of a loaf, perhaps larger. He walked briskly, but without the air of one fearing pursuit. Holmes tapped his finger against the arm of his chair. "And in what direction did he proceed?" "Toward Russell Square, sir. I noted it especially because I expected him to step into a carriage or cab, but there was none. No wheels, no horses, not even the rumble of a cart. He went on foot and was soon lost in the fog." Holmes's eyes glistened with interest. "No conveyance waiting, most significant. Did you observe whether he staggered beneath his burden, or carried it with ease?" "With ease, I should say. It was not heavy. Yet why he would venture abroad so late, and afoot, I cannot tell." Holmes sat back, clearly pleased. "Madam, you have furnished us with most valuable information. Few witnesses, even of sharper sight than yours, would have remarked upon the absence of a carriage. And yet it is often in what is absent, not present, that truth resides." I, somewhat less convinced, ventured to question her further. "Did you hear any sound from Lord Everley's house that evening, raised voices, disturbance, or perhaps the striking of glass?" She shook her head firmly. "All was quiet, doctor. That is why the figure drew my attention at all. The Everley household is respectable and seldom noisy. I did remark to my companion that the parcel was curious, but I thought little more of it until the constables called today." Holmes rose, offering her a small bow. "You have been of great assistance, Mrs. Pargeter. I shall trouble you no further, save to ask one last detail. Did the parcel appear to be wrapped in cloth of any particular hue?" Mrs. Pargeter paused to think. "Dark in colour, perhaps brown or black. In this fog, colours lose their truth, but it was no bright thing." Holmes thanked her warmly, and soon we were again in the street. I could not resist pressing him. "Surely, Holmes, this can only point to Caro. Who else in the household might remove a clock and vanish into the fog with it?" Holmes's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "My dear Watson, you are quick to leap where I prefer to tread. Consider, if Caro indeed bore away the clock, why then return so swiftly to his post under pretence of illness? Why not carry his prize to a safe distance? And why, I observe this well, did he travel on foot with an object easily concealed, yet made no attempt to secure a cab? The absence of wheels, Watson, is as eloquent as their presence." Lestrade, who had accompanied us and now looked somewhat vexed, muttered, "You will have the man arrested soon enough, Mr. Holmes." These fine distinctions may be of interest to you, but to the yard the matter seems plain. Holmes regarded him coolly. Arrest may secure a culprit, Inspector, but not always the truth. We must not allow convenience to masquerade as certainty. We returned to Lord Everley's residence, where Holmes requested another circuit of the servants' entrance. There he crouched upon the stone step, scrutinizing the ground with his lens. The soil was damp from overnight drizzle, yet he pointed to a faint depression, oblong, not circular. The mark of a box or case briefly set down, he explained. No servant satchel, this. See here, the outline of cloth frayed at the corner. Our witness spoke true. He then inspected the nearby wall, running his long fingers over a scratch upon the wood of the door frame. Fresh, he declared. The edge of the parcel, perhaps, scraping in haste. The thief did not pass without leaving his autograph upon the scene. Lord Everley, who had joined us, appeared more troubled than ever. Mr. Holmes, if indeed the man was Caro, do you counsel me to dismiss him at once? Holmes shook his head slowly. Not so, your lordship. To act precipitately may drive him to flight, and with him the truth. Allow matters to continue as they are. The net must be cast wide, then drawn close. As we took our leave, Holmes was uncharacteristically silent, lost in thought. Only once we were again in the cab did he speak. Watson, said he, we have here a curious contradiction. A thief who carries off his prize with deliberate calm, yet leaves wood shavings and scratches like a bungler. A servant who pleads illness, yet perhaps contrives to slip into the fog. And above all, a clock that does not tick, yet compels the most singular exertions. One must ask, was it the clock itself that was stolen, or something it contained? He lapsed into silence once more, his eyes gleaming with that inward fire which told me he had glimpsed, however faintly, the outline of the truth. Chapter 4, A Clue of Incanache. The following day dawned clearer, though a damp chill hung over Baker Street as we resumed our customary places in the sitting-room. Holmes, to all outward appearance, seemed more indolent than ever. He lay stretched across the settee in his dressing gown, the smoke from his long clay pipe drifting lazily toward the ceiling. Yet the gleam in his eye, when Lestrade entered carrying a small parcel under his arm, told me at once that his faculties were anything but dormant. I have brought you something, Mr. Holmes, said the inspector, placing the parcel upon the table. It was discovered late yesterday near the servants' entrance at Lord Everley's house. Might be nothing, but as you are fond of scraps, here is one. Holmes sat up with alacrity, unwrapping the string and brown paper to reveal a crumpled scrap of notepaper. Upon its surface, faint impressions of words and figures could be discerned, though the ink had mostly smeared. Holmes spread it upon the table, weighting the corners with his chemical bottles. Excellent, Lestrade, said he. Even the humblest scrap may prove the keystone. Observe the smudge of violet ink, distinct from the common black. And here are figures, names, and phrases in French, though written but faintly. See how the pen pressed hard enough to indent the sheet. He reached for a small glass rod and a file from his chemical shelf. With practiced ease, he applied a light reagent to the page, which brought the faint writing into sharper relief. I leaned closer. Numbers, certainly, and what appears to be the name Duval, repeated twice. Holmes nodded. And alongside it, notations, perhaps values, or inventory marks. This is no servant's idle doodling, Watson. It smacks of commerce, antiquarian commerce at that. Our thief, or one connected with him, has dealings in the French trade of curiosities. Lestrade frowned. Then we are looking not at the footman, but at some outside agent. Perhaps both, Holmes replied. We must beware of premature conclusions. He rose and moved to the fireplace, where he stooped suddenly and plucked from the grate a small fragment overlooked until now. It was the charred end of a cigarette, thin and aromatic. Holmes turned it over delicately between his fingers. Turkish, he pronounced. Of a particularly rare variety, imported by only a handful of establishments in London. You may note, Watson, the fine texture of the tobacco and the slender paper. It is a brand favoured not by the working class, but by gentlemen of means or foreign dealers who wish to impress. Lestrade shrugged. London is full of foreign dealers. What of it? Holmes gave a dry chuckle. My dear Inspector, when you find an uncommon tobacco at the scene of an uncommon theft, you may safely consider the two not unconnected. A servant would be unlikely to indulge in such luxury. Holmes placed the cigarette carefully in a glass vial. It is often in the ashes that a man leaves his signature. Each tobacco has its own peculiar ash, its own way of crumbling. This one is light grey, fine, and curiously brittle. I can name but 3 establishments that supply it. Lestrade, though visibly unconvinced, made a note. Holmes returned to the scrap of paper. Now let us consider. A French name, Duval. Figures suggestive of trade. A rare Turkish cigarette. And a clock removed with delicate tampering. What do these fragments whisper, Watson? I hesitated, for his gaze was upon me with that mischievous challenge I knew so well. That the theft was planned by one accustomed to the buying and selling of rare objects. Perhaps this Duval is a dealer who coveted Lord Everley's clock. Holmes inclined his head. A sound hypothesis, though incomplete. Ask yourself, why would such a man leave behind a paper that betrays his own name? He is no fool. Unless, of course, he intended to create a trail that misleads. At this Lestrade interjected with impatience. Trail or no, I shall inquire into this Duval. If he is a dealer, the Yard will soon trace him. As for the cigarette, that may narrow our list. Do so, by all means, said Holmes, with a faint smile. Meanwhile, I shall make my own inquiries. That afternoon, Holmes and I walked to a tobacconist's of his acquaintance in the Strand, where, after brief examination, he confirmed the rarity of the ash. Only 3 importers handled the brand, and all supplied chiefly to continental gentlemen resident in London. As we returned to Baker Street, Holmes walked swiftly, his face animated by thought. Watson, he said, the curious feature of this case is not what was stolen, but what was left. The silver remained. The jewels, untouched. And in their place we find wood shavings, ink in a foreign tongue, and Turkish ash. It is as though the thief strove to proclaim, I am no ordinary housebreaker. My work is particular, my purpose concealed. Back in our rooms, he lit his pipe and paced. Consider also the contradiction, the clock, worthless as timepiece, yet valuable enough to merit such risks. What does a silent clock conceal, that men of commerce and secrecy should seek it? He paused suddenly, his eyes gleaming. Watson, I begin to suspect that the clock was no more a clock than a hollow book is a book. Within its case, I fancy, lies something far more dangerous than a broken spring. I could not suppress a shiver. But what, Holmes? That, said he, resuming his pipe with an air of profound calm, is the very question we must answer before the game runs too far ahead of us. Chapter 5, The French Connection. 2 days later, in the waning light of an overcast afternoon, Holmes summoned me from my medical notes with that abrupt energy which signified the germination of some new line of inquiry. He stood at the window of our sitting room, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim glow of gas lamps outside. Watson, said he, the trail runs to King's Cross. Lestrade has discovered that a French antiquarian by the name of Duval has taken rooms at a modest lodging house near that quarter. Our violet ink scrap speaks of him, and I intend we should speak to him ourselves. I had scarcely time to don my coat before Holmes had hailed a cab. Throughout the journey he maintained a thoughtful silence, broken only once when he muttered, "The French have a taste for elaborate concealments." If Duval is indeed connected to this affair, I should expect something more subtle than brute theft. The lodging house proved a narrow building, wedged between a pawnbroker's and a provision shop. Its exterior bore the grime of neglect, yet within we were shown to a parlour where Monsieur Duval awaited us. He was a small, dapper man of middle years, with keen eyes that darted nervously as we entered. His waxed moustache and carefully pressed attire bespoke vanity, though the clutter of papers upon the table betrayed a mind immersed in business. Holmes introduced us with his customary composure. "Monsieur Duval, I am Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague Dr. Watson. We inquire into a matter of some delicacy concerning Lord Everley of Bloomsbury." The Frenchman's fingers twitched at the mention of the name. He attempted a smile. "Ah, Milord Everley. Yes, I had heard of the incident. But what have I to do with a missing clock?" Holmes's voice was calm, almost indifferent. "Your name was found impressed upon a scrap of paper discovered at the scene. It suggested, if not your presence, then at least your connection." Duval spread his hands with theatrical flourish. "A coincidence, monsieur. I am an antiquarian, it is true. I deal in clocks, cabinets, objets d'art. The Everley clock I have long coveted. I even wrote to inquire whether my lord might sell. But I did not steal. I am a man of trade, not of burglary." Holmes's eyes flicked to the violet stains upon Duval's fingers. "And yet your ink betrays you. You favour violet, do you not? The very hue of the smudge upon the paper near the servant's door." The Frenchman flushed, his composure wavering. "Many men favour violet ink. It is common enough in Paris. Am I to be condemned for the colour of my pen?" Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then allowed the faintest of smiles. "You are correct, monsieur. Ink alone condemns no man. Yet your eagerness to dissociate yourself betrays more than innocence would require." At this, Duval's manner shifted. He leaned forward, his voice lower, almost conspiratorial. "I will tell you this, Monsieur Holmes, I did indeed desire the clock. I had reason to believe it contained, how shall I put it, papers of interest. Old letters, perhaps, of political or personal embarrassment. Such things have value, you understand. But I swear upon my honour, I did not remove it from Everley's house. I had hoped only to purchase it at a fair price." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And who informed you of these supposed contents?" Duval hesitated, then shook his head. "I cannot say. A rumour, a whisper among collectors. But if another man has stolen it, he has forestalled me." Holmes asked several more questions, but Duval's replies, though fluent, grew ever vaguer. At last Holmes rose. "I thank you, monsieur. You have been candid, at least in part. Whether you are guilty of theft or merely of avarice, time will reveal." As we departed the lodging house, Lestrade, who had accompanied us, could scarcely conceal his satisfaction. "Caught red-handed, Holmes. Ink upon his fingers, knowledge of the clock's secret, even his name at the scene. We have but to place him under arrest and the case is done." Holmes's expression was one of mild amusement. "Red-handed, perhaps, but not with the clock in his possession. Have you considered, Inspector, that guilt may wear the mask of opportunity? To arrest Duval now would be convenient, but convenience is rarely truth." We walked in silence for some minutes, the bustle of King's Cross surging about us. At length I said, "But Holmes, if not Duval, then who? Surely the trail leads directly to him." Holmes's gaze swept the throng of travellers hurrying into the station. "Watson, picture a man of commerce, who traffics in secrets as much as in antiques. Such a man may wish the world to believe he stole the clock, while in fact he merely sought to purchase its contents. He is guilty of knowledge, but not of action. And yet, Holmes paused, his voice dropping, and yet, he may prove useful bait. If another hand stole the clock, he will wish to cast suspicion on Duval. And in so doing, he may reveal himself. Lestrade groaned. Always riddles with you, Mr. Holmes. The man's as good as confessed, yet you speak of bait and masks. Holmes smiled thinly. That, Inspector, is why the Yard so often brings its puzzles to Baker Street. You are content with the obvious. I prefer the truth. That evening, back in our sitting room, Holmes spread before him the notes he had taken. He studied them with an intensity that admitted no interruption. At last he leaned back, his pipe sending forth its familiar spirals. Watson, said he, Duval is a red herring. He has ink, certainly, and knowledge, but not the clock. I would wager my violin that it is hidden nearer to Bloomsbury than the inspector suspects. The question remains, who among Lord Everley's household, or his acquaintances, would profit most from the concealment of old letters bound within its case? He fell into silence, the smoke wreathing about him like the mists of the problem itself. I knew better than to press him further, for his mind was already deep within that labyrinth whose exit only he could see. Chapter 6: The Red Herring. The morning papers greeted us with bold headlines declaring that the mystery of the Everley clock had been solved. French dealer arrested, Scotland Yard triumphs, crowed the Daily Telegraph. Duval's name was splashed across the columns, with lurid suggestions of international intrigue and smuggling rings. Inspector Lestrade, not one to waste time in such matters, had taken it upon himself to clap the man in irons scarcely an hour after our visit to his lodgings. I read the article aloud at breakfast, marvelling at the speed with which the Yard had moved. It seems, Holmes, that our work is done, said I. The culprit sits in custody, and Lord Everley may sleep sound once more. Holmes, who had been buttering his toast with a languid precision, emitted a soft laugh. Done, Watson? Nay, the play has scarcely begun. Duval is no more the thief than I am. He is guilty of indiscretion, of avarice, perhaps of loose talk among collectors, but not of this theft. But the evidence? I protested. His ink-stained fingers, the French note, the cigarettes, surely the chain is complete. Chains, my dear fellow, are only as strong as their weakest link. In this case, the links are too strong, too neat, too conveniently placed. It is the very completeness of the picture that condemns it. Someone has taken pains to direct suspicion upon Duval, and Lestrade, in his eagerness for a swift conclusion, has obligingly played his part. Holmes pushed aside his breakfast and rose, pacing the room with that restless energy which always heralded new thought. Consider, Watson, why would Duval leave a scrap bearing his own name at the scene? Why would he smoke a rare cigarette, so distinctive, in a house he sought to rob? He is not a dullard. These are the marks not of his guilt, but of another's design to incriminate him. I was silent, for his reasoning, as always, carried conviction despite its paradoxical nature. That afternoon we paid another visit to Lord Everley, who had himself read the newspapers and expressed both relief and unease. If the man is indeed guilty, Mr. Holmes, then I am glad justice has prevailed. Yet I confess I feel no easier in my mind. The clock is still absent, and the loss is not lightened by the imprisonment of a foreigner. Holmes bowed gravely. Your lordship is wise to be cautious. The capture of a scapegoat does not restore a stolen treasure. May I inquire whether you have received any communication since the theft? At this, Lord Everley hesitated, then withdrew from his desk a folded sheet. His hand trembled slightly as he passed it across. It was a note, crudely scrawled, demanding a sum of money in exchange for the return of the clock. The threat was blunt: should payment not be made within 3 days, the clock would be destroyed. Holmes read it carefully, his lips compressed. Aha! Here is the true voice of our thief. Observe, Watson, the coarse phrasing, the uneven hand, scarcely the style of an educated antiquarian. And note further, the demand comes after Duval's arrest, not before. If Duval were the thief, he would have secured his ransom before risking capture. Lord Everley looked stricken. What am I to do, Mr. Holmes? I cannot bear to see the relic destroyed, yet neither do I wish to yield to extortion. Holmes folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Do nothing, your lordship. Leave the matter in my hands. To comply would only embolden the villain, to refuse may flush him into the open. Either way, I promise you, the clock will not be lost. We took our leave, and in the cab Holmes remained absorbed in thought. At last he spoke. The ransom note is the final nail in the coffin of the Duval hypothesis. Too clumsy, too vulgar. It bears the hallmark not of a foreign dealer, but of someone within the household, someone who knew precisely what lay within the clock and seeks to profit by silence. Then Caro? I ventured. Holmes gave me a half-smile. Ah, Watson, your loyalty to the obvious suspect does you credit. But remember, the most suspicious man is often placed in our path by design. The true culprit may be closer than we think. That evening Lestrade himself called, flushed with triumph. We've got him, Mr. Holmes. Duval's cell is shut tight, and the Yard will have the matter closed within the week. You may rest easy. Holmes regarded him coolly. Rest easy, Inspector? While the ransom note circulates and the clock remains missing. I admire your zeal, but the truth has not yet been apprehended. Lestrade scowled. You are too fond of mysteries, Mr. Holmes. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. Indeed, said Holmes softly. And sometimes it is the snare that catches the unwary. Mark my words, Lestrade, Duval is a red herring. The real quarry still runs free. With that, he turned away, leaving the inspector speechless. Later, when we were alone, Holmes stood before the fire, his figure outlined against the glow. Watson, he said, his voice low but resolute, the thief believes himself secure, hidden behind a convenient veil of Duval's guilt. But in his arrogance he has overreached. He has left signs, wood shavings, grit, a careless ransom note, that betray him. The trail leads us back, not outward, but inward, to Bloomsbury itself. He tapped the mantelpiece thoughtfully, his eyes fixed upon the flames. The game tightens, my friend. Before long, we shall draw the net. Chapter 7, The Return to Bloomsbury. 2 evenings after the arrival of the ransom note, Holmes announced with sudden decision that we must return once more to Lord Everley's house. His manner had about it the quiet intensity that told me he believed the final threads of the mystery were within his grasp. The criminal grows bold, he observed as we drove through the misty streets. He believes Duval in custody and the Yard satisfied. It is precisely at such a moment that overconfidence breeds carelessness. Tonight, Watson, we shall test a certain hypothesis. Lord Everley greeted us in his library, his lined face etched with anxiety. The old nobleman had clearly slept little. Holmes spoke with a measured calm that seemed to steady him. Your lordship, I must beg your indulgence. I wish to examine, not the drawing-room where the clock stood, but this chamber, the library. Pray, allow me complete freedom to inspect as I choose. Permission granted, Holmes began his investigation with that cat-like grace I had so often admired. He moved from bookcase to bookcase, from hearth to window, every movement precise, deliberate, yet seemingly effortless. He knelt upon the carpet, feeling with his long fingers along the skirting boards. He tapped gently upon the panels of the walls, listening for variance in tone. At length he paused before a tall oak cabinet in the far corner. It was an imposing piece, dark with age, filled with volumes of lore and history. Holmes ran his hand along the floor beside it, then produced his lens and peered intently. Watson, he called softly. Observe here. The dust upon the boards is thick, yet broken in one spot, as though displaced by recent movement. And here, an almost imperceptible groove in the floor, consistent with a panel that has shifted. I bent to look, and though my untrained eye saw little, I trusted his. He pressed with sudden firmness against the side of the cabinet. To my astonishment, the panel yielded inward with a faint creak, revealing a narrow recess hollowed within the wall. The space was empty, but the dust within bore fresh disturbance. Holmes regarded it with keen satisfaction. A hiding place, Watson. Our thief concealed the clock here before attempting his crude ransom. The dust tells me it was lodged not days but hours ago. Lord Everley gave a start. Then the scoundrel has been here, under my very roof. Precisely, said Holmes. The theft was never a removal to some distant lair, but a concealment within the house itself. Only a member of the household could contrive such a thing. At that moment Jessup, the butler, entered to announce that supper was served. Holmes's gaze flicked briefly to the man, then back to the recess. When Jessup withdrew, Holmes murmured, "Note his shoes, Watson, clean as a parlour floor, though he has come directly from the cellar to summon us. It suggests attentions to his boots not ordinarily required of a butler at such an hour." Holmes next requested that we be shown the servants' quarters. Lord Everley, though visibly uncomfortable, complied. Down narrow stairs and along a dim corridor we went, the air growing damp and chill. In the small chamber allotted to Caro, the footman, Holmes examined the modest furnishings with unerring precision. On the shelf stood a boot brush thick with a peculiar grit. Holmes lifted it delicately. "Not the dust of Bloomsbury's pavements, Watson. This is cellar earth, dry, granular, of a hue seldom found above ground. Our friend Caro has been scrubbing his boots of late, though no country ramble could have brought this residue here." I felt a surge of conviction. Then it is Caro, after all. He concealed the clock in the recess, then used the cellar passage to move it at will. Holmes smiled faintly. So it would appear. And yet, let us not leap before the evidence. The brush tells us his boots were soiled, the recess tells us the clock was hidden. But where is it now? Not in the recess, as we have seen. Perhaps still in the cellar. We descended further, guided by a reluctant maid, into the dim vaults beneath the house. Here, amidst cobwebbed bottles and the earthy smell of damp stone, Holmes prowled with lantern in hand. At a corner where the wall met the floor, he stooped and brushed aside a scattering of loose mortar. His hand closed upon a cavity behind a dislodged brick. Empty. Only a trace of dust and the faint impression of wood against stone. Holmes straightened, the lantern throwing his lean features into sharp relief. Here the clock rested, Watson. Caro, or another, removed it not long ago. The grit upon his brush matches precisely this cellar earth. We are close, very close. Back upstairs, Holmes requested that Lord Everley detain all his servants within the house until further notice. "No one must leave," he said. "The thief believes himself secure, but by dawn he shall find the walls closing about him." That night, as we returned to Baker Street, I could contain my curiosity no longer. "Holmes, the evidence points squarely to Caro. Why do you hesitate to declare him guilty?" Holmes's eyes gleamed in the cab's dim light. "Because, my dear Watson, guilt is not merely a matter of circumstance. It is motive that seals the matter. Caro is a convenient suspect, yes, but convenience is the enemy of truth. Remember, the ransom note was crude, the concealment clumsy, yet the choice of object, the clock, was singularly shrewd. That shrewdness may belong to a subtler mind than Caro's." He leaned back, drawing his cloak close. "Tomorrow, Watson, the curtain shall rise on the final act. And when it falls, you shall see how the silent clock speaks volumes." Chapter 8, Holmes Explains. The following evening found us once more at Lord Everley's residence. The servants had been gathered at Holmes's request, their faces pale with apprehension beneath the lamplight of the drawing-room. Lestrade stood impatiently near the mantel, clearly expecting a straightforward confession wrung from Caro, the unfortunate footman. Lord Everley himself sat rigid in an armchair, his expression a mixture of dignity and dread. Holmes remained characteristically calm, his long fingers steepled as he surveyed the company. At last he rose, and a hush descended. "Your lordship, ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you are no doubt eager for this affair to be concluded. Inspector Lestrade believes the thief to be your footman Caro. The newspapers have already convicted Monsieur Duval. Yet I say to you now, both men are innocent of this theft. The true culprit stands among us, and his guilt may be demonstrated beyond dispute." There was a collective murmur. Lestrade bristled. "Come, Mr. Holmes, this is too much. The evidence against Caro is plain, the boot brush, the cellar earth, the recess in the wall." Holmes lifted a hand, silencing him. "Circumstantial evidence, Inspector, carefully contrived to deceive. Permit me to explain, step by step." He turned to Lord Everley. "The clock, your lordship, was no mere ornament. Its silence was not due to age alone. Within its case, hidden behind a false panel, lay a bundle of letters written in your youth, indiscreet in tone, and of such a nature that their publication would imperil your standing. Is this not so?" Lord Everley's face paled, and he bowed his head in mute assent. Holmes continued, "Someone within this household discovered the secret. That person contrived to remove the clock without disturbance, conceal it temporarily within a cellar recess, and then draft a ransom note to extract money for its safe return. To secure his scheme, he planted evidence pointing toward Duval, whose interest in the clock was notorious. Thus the violet ink, the French name, the Turkish cigarette, every fragment designed to implicate the antiquarian." Lestrade interjected hotly, "Then what of Caro?" "His boots bore the very grit of the cellar." "Indeed," said Holmes, his eyes gleaming, because the true thief required a scapegoat closer to home. "Caro was instructed, under the guise of some menial errand, to pass through the cellar. Later, his boots were soiled, and he was seen scrubbing them. The brush became, in the thief's hands, damning evidence against an innocent man." A gasp rose from the servants. Caro himself, a thin, nervous youth, looked as though he might collapse. "I swear, sir," he stammered, "I never touched the clock." "I believe you," said Holmes kindly. Then, turning, his gaze fixed upon Jessup, the butler. "Shall I recount the rest, Jessup? Or will you relieve us of the performance?" The butler stiffened, his face blanching beneath its composure. "Sir, you insult me," he protested. "I have served Lord Everley faithfully these 20 years. Holmes's voice was cool as steel. "Faithful service does not preclude greed. You, Jessup, alone had constant access to every room. You alone knew the household routine so intimately that you could move without arousing suspicion. You alone possessed the education to know what those letters meant, and the cunning to craft a deception that cast blame first on a foreign dealer, then on a naive footman." He drew from his pocket the ransom note. "Yet here lay your undoing. You strove to disguise your hand, but the very attempt betrayed you. The peculiar slant of the R and the heavy downstroke of the T are identical to those in the list of cellar provisions you wrote for Lord Everley last week. And further, Holmes produced a vial containing the cigarette ash. Your fondness for Turkish tobacco is no secret. The ash I found in the grate matched precisely that in the tray of your pantry." Jessup's defiance crumbled. He staggered, clutching at the chair back, then sank into it with a groan. "It is true," he muttered hoarsely. "I found the letters while polishing the clock months ago. I thought I might profit by them. But I meant no harm, my lord. Only money, just a little money. Lord Everleigh's face was a mask of anguish. Jessup, after all these years. Holmes's tone softened. Your lordship, the man sought gain, not your ruin. He feared exposure as much as you. His plan was crude, it could not have succeeded. The letters are safe. From within his coat he produced a small bundle bound with faded ribbon. I retrieved them this morning from a more cunning hiding place in the library, the final shift Jessup made before despairing of his scheme. They are yours once more. Lord Everleigh received them with trembling hands, his eyes glistening with relief. Lestrade stepped forward, his face dark with embarrassment. By thunder, Holmes, you've outpaced us again. I'll see Jessup conveyed to the yard at once. A nasty business. Holmes inclined his head. Not nasty, Inspector, merely human. Weakness, temptation, fear. Such are the true motives behind many a crime. When at last we departed, the air outside seemed fresher, the night clearer. As we drove back to Baker Street, I could not help but voice my admiration. Holmes, once more you have pierced the fog where all others grope blind. Yet tell me, what first led you to suspect the butler? Holmes smiled faintly. The smallest of things, Watson. When Jessup entered the library, his boots were spotless despite his errand to the cellar. Too spotless. He had been at pains to conceal his tracks, but the very perfection of his disguise was its betrayal. From that seed, the whole plant grew. I shook my head in wonder. Your powers astound me, Holmes. To think, all sprang from a clock that did not tick. Ah, Watson, said he, settling back with a contented sigh, the world is full of silent clocks. Objects mute to most ears, yet clamorous to those who know how to listen. In their silence lies the loudest testimony. And with that cryptic remark, he closed his eyes, the faintest smile upon his lips, as the cab rattled us home through the London night.